And then Doreen, I think I will make you host.
Okay, and I will make sure we're Facebook.
Hey, Robin.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Hi, Robin.
Hi.
And then Doreen, you're going to worry about speaker view versus. Doreen and I are often like battling. Like we're both pushing the button at the same time. Great. Yes, we all have our buttons. And we have our button makers in Dick and Kristen.
And we are live on Facebook. I will be watching questions there.
Great. Hi, Victoria. Great. Well, we are going to, hello, we are live on Facebook. It is 5:31. I am Lisa Reynolds, and I am the Democratic candidate running for Oregon House District 36. And this is a virtual town hall. The loosely titled title for tonight is Portland Protest Police. And this is certainly something I've been very interested in, but in calling voters quite a bit for the general election, this is the topic that keeps coming up. I have a special guest here. I don't know if she's here for everyone. Candace Avalos, who is first and foremost one of my Emerge sisters, but Candace is the coordinator for student government relations at Portland State. She mentors and cultivates students in civic engagement on campus and in their communities. And I was actually honored to be at a Portland State University student-run forum on Tuesday with my opponent, James Ball, and Senator Ginny Burdick was there too. Candace was like totally in the background, which was really awesome. The students totally ran the show, although Candace did run the clock, which was helpful. But it was nice to see her face there. But it was also really amazing to see that this really was a student-run event, which is, I know, is her work behind the scenes. Candace is chair of the 11-member Citizen Review Committee, which we kind of call the CRC, which is not the Columbia River crossing in this situation. It was created in 2001 to help improve police accountability and is made up of members of the community. And she's actually chair of that committee right now. And definitely something I would like for Candace to talk about. Candace also ran her first election. She ran for Portland City Council in May of 2020. This will be, she was defeated by Carmen Rubio, but I know Candace will be back running for office. I can't wait to see what she does next, but what she's doing now is pretty amazing. So we are also expecting Senator Lou Frederick. I don't see him here. We are going to go ahead and get started. And Candace, what I thought we would start with is really kind of your area of expertise. I would love your kind of your personal perspective and your kind of professional in terms of what you're seeing in your volunteer role with the city. And if you want to touch on what you're seeing with the students at Portland State, really, I don't want to curate what you're about to say. I would love to allow time for the ballot measure 26217, the police oversight ballot measure, if you could comment on that as well. But take it away, Candace. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you for having me. Super excited about to discuss this topic because I'm sure you're hearing it from the voters. A lot of people, it's top of mind. And I think it's because we're just at a really pivotal moment in our country, in our city, and we're looking for leadership. We're looking for, people doing the right thing. And so that is what has inspired so many people to run, people like you, Lisa, coming out of Emerge, and, people want to see change. And I think that watching so many people from all walks of life stand together in support of Black lives was very inspiring. It's personal for me. I'm half Black, I'm half Latina. My family on my mom's side came across the border in the 70s from Guatemala. And then on my Black family side, they grew up in the Jim Crow South in Southern Virginia. So these experiences of my multiracial family really inform my sense of justice and my sense of wanting to make sure that America lives up to the ideals that we all, especially from the immigrant community, America is great, right? And we want to make that real. And so that is what has pushed me into this world of politics. I joined the CRC in 2017. I had moved out to Portland from Virginia and was working with, young leaders that were trying to find their passions and do good on campus and in their communities. And I started to figure out, how can I be more involved in the community? And the opportunity came up to join the Citizen Review Committee. It's, like Lisa said, 11 people, all members of Portland, citizens of Portland. And our role is to gather community feedback about policing, be advisory to the Independent Police Review. A huge part of our role is hearing appeals. And the very long system of, supposed police accountability, which I'll talk about, Measure 26-17. But we're kind of like at the tail end of this process where people can appeal decisions that get made internally in the Portland Police Bureau. And then we get to make, decisions on those cases. Now, our standard of review is really low, which, it's not to get super into the details, but it just means that we don't really have a lot of authority in being able to overturn decisions that get made. And that has created a lot of frustration among Portlanders who see, injustice, frankly, on the daily, and how the police harm vulnerable communities. Like we were talking before we went on air, the Oregonian article mentioning that the police continue to lock up houseless folks. Over half of arrests are houseless folks, and houseless folks are only 3% of the population. So it's a problem. And how we hold these people who have a legal authority and lethal authority over us is super critical, that we have significant oversight. So, I've been working in the system for a couple years. Part of why I ran for city council was because of what I saw behind the scenes, and realizing that the police union had amassed a lot of power. They were kind of holding city council hostage, holding our budget hostage, and ultimately not producing what they say they do. They keep saying, give us more money and we'll fix it, and they don't. And so, seeing this uprising across the country, finally there's a political will and an understanding of the problem beyond just the communities that have had to face them, especially in the Black community. So this measure is an attempt to really rewrite our future and how we hold this powerful institution accountable for what they do. So the measure is super critical in a couple of ways. One, it's going to be truly autonomous from the Police Bureau and City Council. Independent Police Review right now, I mean, they're technically, a part of, or separate from the Police Bureau, but they don't have a lot of power over what the Police Bureau does. So it makes, we just need something that has actual teeth and that can hold them accountable. Also, it will have stable funding, which is really important. So part of the ballot measure makes sure that it has enough money to be able to conduct complete investigations and have the staffing support, investigator support to do their job. It's also going to give them subpoena power and access to internal department records. IPR, for supposedly what they're supposed to do is to oversee the police, and they have such a hard time getting data from the police. And we need data to be able to measure outcomes and be able to track disparate treatment, and know when we apply a policy, is it actually helping the communities that we say it does? And definitely, as somebody who works in the world of education, I know very well that you have to be able to measure your data and apply new things that you can change. And there's just no capacity for that currently. So I think that's really important that funding is implemented in the structure of the measure, and it's going into the charter, so that it's not at the whim of politicians that come and go. If the people want to change how it runs, the people have to vote on it. That's also why it's on the ballot and you all have a chance to vote in. I obviously strongly encourage that you do. Another big thing is that they'll have the legal authority to produce enforceable actions. And my favorite part about the bill is that if this oversight board decides that there is a policy change that needs to be made, if the Portland police reject it, it has to go to city council for a vote. And that's really critical because, I'm a volunteer on this board. There's a couple other boards that oversee the police, and we'll just constantly be coming up with recommendations that just go nowhere. There's no accountability, not only for the police to implement them, but also for city council to do something about it. So now there will be. It's going to kind of hold their feet to the fire, and they need to make decisions, because I think that's also part of the problem, is that a lot of city council over the years, they just kind of shy away because it's hard. But we're saying that we have to do the hard things if we're going to make real change. So that's why I hope people support this oversight measure. And overall, my perspective is just that we're, I suspect we're going to continue to have protests. People are hurting. Coronavirus has really amplified the stark differences in our various communities. And so I hope that we can do our best to continue to support the initiatives and also challenge, people to turn that energy into actual policy and turn it into good. And that's what I'm trying to do every day, trying to translate the voices on the street and do the work as a volunteer in this space and push for this, policy change that will be really drastic in changing how we have oversight of the police. So that's me, that's what I care about, and I'm happy to talk more about it.
Great, thank you, Candace. And I think the other, just in terms of my research on this ballot measure, I know there's been some thoughts that it does too much too quickly. And I think one thing that what it really sets up is a process to really have an 18-month implementation, kind of roll in implementation of this board, which I think is good. It'll feel like it's not coming quickly enough, but it certainly feels like the right step forward.
Well, it's important for people to know too that this measure is about changing the charter and putting in a frame. So it is definitely not all the details. And me being on the CRC, I'm going to be working really closely with the people that are putting together the aftermath of hopefully when it passes. And so that's going to take, we're going to take, what we learned from the CRC system, from the IPR system, from the PIAC system way back in the day. We have learned so many things along the way. And that process is going to be to implement not only what we've learned, but also national best practices. And, we have the power to do this. We just need to stop letting an obstructionist police union get in the way of real change. So I'm hoping that people will support the framing that we're putting in there that gives it the authority. And then we're going to have a community-led process to really look at what community safety looks like and what oversight looks like.
Great. And I think it's worth noting that the architect of this, I hope I'm not overstating her involvement, is Joanne Hardesty. And I think for a lot of us who have followed this issue, certainly brings such a legitimacy to this measure. And couple things that I would love to talk about with you, Candace. First of all, guys can see why I asked Candace to join us tonight. I am going to try to reach Senator Frederick, but we have plenty to talk about without him, because one of the other issue that has come about this measure, and I don't want to talk the whole time about this measure, there's so much to talk about, is that there are things that may need to change in the union and in the police union, as well as at the state level around arbitration issues. But again, I know that is something that Senator Lou Frederick and the rest of the People of Color caucus at the state legislature are more than prepared to do. Wait, and now I lost my train of thought. It'll come back. The other issue that I know that Cheryl had a question, and I thought it might be worth talking about that for a minute. And I'm going to read this, and this is opening up kind of a new topic here, which is what we're seeing kind of on the streets with the protests. So just to give, I think everyone knows the timeline, everyone has the context. On May 25th, George Floyd was murdered by a police officer in Minneapolis after he the police officer had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 49 seconds. And that has galvanized this country in a way that feels different than previous horrific acts of violence by police officers against people of color. And certainly in Portland, I think we're on day 153. I think we're 153 days out from May 25th, if I did the math right. And I have to admit, I am a little bit less in touch with the day in, day out protests as they are happening these days. I will say over the summer, like a lot of us, I was down at the Justice Center quite a bit. I got my gas mask from Lindsay. We were there standing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement and certainly in opposition to the federal agents. And I don't know, Candace, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Candace, do you feel like you have an update on where things are with the protests, over the past, say, 30 days?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am not out in the protests. I haven't been out in a bit. So it's not, and it's for a lot of reasons. I mean, one, a big reason for me, I wish I could be out there, is that I'm afraid. I'm afraid of the police, and they have just got escalated so drastically. And, recently brought on AC, Assistant Chief Resch, to a CRC meeting to talk about, because we have a crowd control and use of force work group. And so we've been doing a lot of work and research and talking to the community about their experiences in the protests, because, we really cherish and value our First Amendment rights here in Portland. And it's a difficult topic because the issue that we're protesting is the force that is out there during protests. So it just makes it super complicated and really charged. That's why this has been so much different, I think, than many other protests we've seen in Portland. And not to mention that you have to put the context in, you have to layer on, the exasperation that people are feeling about their government not protecting them, their government being overly harsh, letting 200,000 people die of coronavirus, leaving people for months without any kind of income, and then people losing their homes, losing so much. And so I think that all of that just really bubbled up in this racial justice movement, because so often, Black and brown people fall the hardest on those issues. The issues fall hardest on them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I think that, lately I'm not super in touch with what's going on. I'm on Twitter all the time, just keep an eye, because that's kind of where the protest community has decided to kind of organize and talk about the issues. And so I keep track of what's going on. And also I keep track of it from the crowd control perspective in my role on the CRC, watching videos. We did a survey recently that got 1,300 responses. We've been sifting through all of that information, and just trying to get a bigger picture, beyond just the videos that we see online, and talking to many different community leaders that do go more frequently. And I think that really it's one of those things where, especially after over 150 some days, you go out to protest about police brutality and you experience extreme police brutality. The next night you're going out to protest that night before, on top of the larger picture. And so that has compounded and compounded. And it has been, I even asked AC Resch, I was like, is there a plan? I expect that people are going to continue to protest to and through the election. Is there a plan to do anything differently? And it was like, no, there's no real plan. And, that's really upsetting. I know that AC Resch doesn't speak for all of the police bureau, and maybe other people think there's a plan, but that's what we were asking. That's what she was there to talk about. And to hear that from her was really upsetting, because it's clear that it has just become, the charged relationship is just like supercharged. So I don't know. I don't know I don't remember the original source of your question, but I think that lately, everything that we saw in July, whenever more people were out there, it's all still happening, and it's worse, especially because there's less numbers, there's less people protected. Sometimes you go out there and like almost half of the people are arrested, and they get arrested immediately. So there's just been this they are squashing people's rights to assemble, and that's something that we hold dear as Americans. So, and in the context of a Donald Trump presidency, we take it really personally. So I think people are just really hurt. And people always ask me, how do you stop the protest? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think that it's it's going to take longer than overnight, obviously, but unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of leaders come up and really be vocal and really support what's happening. Because I think that's it. It's just like you kind of retreat because it's scary. It's gotten to that point where it's like, oh gosh, people are really angry, and you know, it's scary to confront that, but we have to. We have to confront their pain and their anger, and we have to respond in a meaningful way. And, you know, I don't even see people really doing the work of trying to bring those people together.
Right.
And that's what's the biggest puzzle, you know, the piece of the puzzle that I think is missing.
Yeah, I know it does feel like it's right. It's this continual cycle, and to me, it does feel like the onus is on the police, or at least city leadership, to try to bring folks to the table and think of a, you know, what is that? You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Absolutely.
And I think by the same token, and reflecting on one of the questions that came up that was presented, is, you know, there is obviously some violence, and I think a lot of us were I guess a little upset about the violence against the Oregon Historical Society, which is, you know, certainly a place where I used to take my kids a lot. It's on my list to get back to, maybe right after the election. I realize I haven't been there in a long time. And there is this feeling, and we're not sure who did the violence, right? There is this feeling that that part also feels like it's not being addressed. And I know this is I'm always a little careful about this question, because I do think that, you know, the people who are protesting, you know, generational systemic racism, I don't want to be slapping their wrist for being particularly angry and feeling that nothing else is getting the attention. But there is also this concern about some of the safety issues or destruction of property. And I also, and this is something I get asked a lot about, but, you know, what about downtown being all boarded up? Well, I am very certain that a lot of that is because of COVID, and that we had our huge economic downturn starting March 25th, not May 25th. But anyway, I will ask for your comments on that too, Candace. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it's really frustrating to see people try to change the narrative of what's going on with the downtown businesses and not take into consideration COVID. Like, that's just really disingenuous. And it's like, are we having a real conversation here, or is this politics? So that annoys me personally. But, you know, of course, it's a tense situation, and it has escalated because there has been a leadership vacuum, in my opinion. And that's what leaders do, you know. It's the leader's job to be a voice that reasons with the people, to be a communer of different voices and help them come to some kind of, you know, compromise, or some kind of place where we can all agree that we're going to keep working forward, but we're going to, you know, dial back on the direct action. It's like, let's move that direct action into the halls of people that make decisions for our society, the lawmakers. So I think that's part of the problem personally. So it's one of those things where there's so many, kind of like with coronavirus, it's like there are so many missteps that were made that there is no easy fix anymore. You know, we could have fixed it a lot earlier if we had been more steadfast and convicted, you know, in our values, and just really met the people where they were. So I think that when, you know, with the Oregon Historical Society, for example, I get, like, it is not an unreasonable thing to be upset when, you know, things that we all hold, you know, dear get destroyed. That's not unreasonable. So I think that it's okay that people were angry about that, and that there was some tension. And I think, yeah, we need to challenge some of that sometimes. Things got a little out of hand, and people, it was like, that was too far, you know. And I think that's a lot of, in this protest situation, it's like a lot of push and shove, you know, back and forth, challenge, support. So I think that was, you know, it kind of hit a nerve, it seemed like, at least from when I saw people talking about it. And it started a conversation, and, you know, I'm hoping that moving forward we agree, like, maybe let's try some different things. And I don't run the protests. I don't, you know, this is just my opinion. And I respect that people can disagree with me, that they can feel feel, differently about it. I respect that. I just feel like I wish that we had people that could unite us in a way. But I also think that it's important. I was talking about this with Joanne Hardesty she had a call with, some up and coming leaders, and we were just talking about all the protests and everything. And, people are like, there's not going to be another MLK, right? It's not like MLK is just going to emerge, right? I think that's really also important to talk about in this world, because the way that protests and uprisings, people coming together, it looks a lot differently. We communicate. I mean, no, who would have thought Twitter would have been a thing, right? And so it's this really leaderless movement that I think that's also what makes it hard. It's hard, like, who do you negotiate with? Who do the leaders, like the leaders of both sides of this, I guess, who's negotiating the terms of how we come to, some kind of resolve. So I think that's also what's making this really challenging. And I don't know, again, I think we just need to figure out how to build a community that doesn't rely on just a couple of people to speak for everybody, but really a community where everybody feels like they're a part of the decisions. I think we've just kind of let it become so like, oh, well, so-and-so's got that, right? And we've kind of lost this in touch sense, in my opinion, of like your neighbor, and this is your community, and we all have to work to this together. We can't just blame it all on Ted Wheeler. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think I'm with you. I think it's reasonable to be upset with that incident, and I'm hoping that through the conversation that happened, we can move to a place of doing some different strategies.
Great, thank you for that. I wanted to, I alluded to a little bit earlier about the police union, and that it seems that in Portland, and I'm not sure if this is nationwide, it seems like from what I've read, this isn't unusual, that Portland's police union is particularly strong. And my understanding is the police have been without a contract for over a year, and I think there was supposed to be a renegotiation this spring, and it was delayed because of COVID. What should be our goals and our opportunities with that renegotiation? And is there a way, can you negotiate a change in culture or what we're hoping to see in terms of a community policing type model and a police force that is trained in de-escalating, let's think about the police force we want to have. And is that something that, is there an opportunity here in discussing that in union contracts?
I think the union contract, for me, the end goal is making sure that the people that have power in deciding what the police do are the people that get elected. Not a unaccountable police union that has their own agenda. I think that has been the biggest problem, and there have been so many things over the years that they have continued to just amass power and influence in City Hall, and it's also just, it's a hard thing for politicians to come to terms with. I mean, this is not new, this conflict of politicians and dealing with police misconduct. It's not new, but it's definitely, we have higher expectations now, and we're trying to, again, meet the moment, and we can't continue to be held back by old ideas. So I think for me, the goal of the negotiation process is how to, there's one thing that gets talked about a lot is the embarrassment clause in the contract, which basically protects the police from being disciplined in a way that is likely to embarrass them, which to me is embarrassing. Like, why, first of all, like, you're not babies, you're grown people that have authority, and you're public figures. This isn't about embarrassing you, it's about holding you accountable. So there's little things like that throughout the contract that it's like, why, who negotiated this? Like, it needs to just go in the trash bin. So I'm hoping that that is the goal. And then, as far as like how we affect culture and everything, I mean, gosh, it's going to take a lot of different things. It's going to take oversight. It's going to take a good contract. It's going to take real community engagement. And that is the leader's job. not the police. That is the mayor and city councilor's job. So I think it's about, making sure that they really have the reins and that they're making decisions that are influenced and informed by what the people want, not what the police want. And, it's one of those things where, like, I don't want to, it's touchy, but I just have to say, like, the fact that 87% of our police don't even live in our city, that is incredibly problematic. And that is a trend across the country that I think has continued to increase this, like, political tension between police and the communities that they serve when they don't even live in those communities. So I really want to see that addressed. And I think that, again, accountability for me is at the crux of so many of our issues, because if you have a police force that is accountable, that when you have other people in the profession that say, hey, that person is doing that thing that's illegal or wrong or whatever, and they can actually, see that come to a conclusion, which leads to somebody getting removed, that is going to bring integrity to the profession, which is going to bring more people into it. If they feel like they're a part of something that, isn't a sham, when it comes to accountability. That's what they have among the doctoral world, which I know you're familiar with, Lisa, the legal, community. There has to be, we need to return the integrity of the profession. And that means that they need to be held accountable. So I think that those are the things that are going to change the culture, and because those things start to move the needle on who becomes officers. I met an officer, I go on ride-alongs because I have to on the CRC. I met this officer who, she was a social worker for 10 years before she became an officer. And we had really complex conversations about, the housing problem and, how that intersects with police. And it's like, I want to see more of you, I want to see more people that are coming into this profession from a mental health, realm, from a restorative justice realm, not just a draconian, crime and punishment kind of world. We don't live in that world. And I want to see us move away from that. So I'm hoping that also is part of the process.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, I was thinking as I was kind of preparing for today, one of the things I tell parents of toddlers, and I don't mean to say that police are toddlers, one of the things is the way to change behavior is to reward the behavior you want to see, right? So I really think as we think about how we want police, to be de-escalated, and we can talk about the cahoots model and all that too. I mean, I certainly have all that on the agenda if we have time. We need to really change our incentives for police officers, right? Let alone the training, unconscious bias. And I hope I don't sound too much like a Pollyanna, but I think if we are able to make this revolution, it may take 5 years, it may take 10 years. I think police officers are going to actually love their jobs more. I think it's going to be a calling and a career that feels different than it is now. I want to interrupt for a minute. Oh, and I do want to acknowledge what Robin said, and Robin is right. There's been, when we talk about the violence on the part of the protesters, the violence is very small compared to the completely disproportionate response by the police. We have seen that again and again. I have seen it with my own eyes. We've watched it on Twitter, and it's scary and horrifying. And I think it's super important to acknowledge that. We do have Senator Lou Frederick on the line, phoning us. Thank you, Senator Frederick, for being here. Senator Lou Frederick has been in the Oregon legislature since, I have my notes here, but it's getting dark. Has been in the Oregon legislature, first as a state representative, and now as a state senator for in Northeast Portland. And I love his background because he has a background in communications. He's been a television journalist. He's actually has a strong science background in biology, and has been just an incredibly outspoken advocate on issues that affect people of color, and has been, I think, kind of one of the chief spokespeople, so to speak, for the People of Color Caucus in the state legislature. And as I alluded to earlier, when we talk about the measure, the 26-217 or 271, I can never keep the number straight, the one that Candace described so well for us. There is, the premise that some state laws will need to be altered in order to institute such an oversight board. So Senator Frederick, thank you for being here. Feel free to make any comments, but I would love to hear your thoughts on where things go next in terms of state's ability to change how policing is done. It looks like you are still muted.
I think on the phone, it's like *6 maybe to unmute. If it's not *6, it's *9.
He's raising his hand.
I think raise hand was one of those. So do the other one. Like I know *6, one and *9, one is raise hand and one is unmute.
Okay.
Oh, here we are.
Can you hear me?
We
Can
can
you hear me
hear
now?
you. Yes, yes. Thank you, Senator. Thanks for joining.
Just so that you know, I'm traveling, so I'm about to go into the tunnel on 26. So I hope I won't lose you.
It's a short
I
tunnel.
think that what I can. It's a short tunnel. That's true. We have quite a bit that's underway. By way of Janelle Bynum and Senator James Manning and the committee that they chaired, we have a number of bills that we'll be talking about that'll be basically dealing with police accountability on a broad scale, as well as recruitment and screening of police officers. So you can expect to see a number of things there. I would argue the bills that are going to be suggested for the 2021 session. It's frankly a long list, but they are primarily dealing with, in terms of the police, they're primarily dealing with what we see with trying to really beef up accountability. And in fact, I think partly what I just heard someone say about the idea of really reinforcing the kind of policies that we want to see, and not adding to some of the responsibilities that we've seen police attempt to take on, and they can't. They don't have the facility, the capacity to do it. So it's going to be a broad situation. We're going to see not only issues related officially to police, but we'll see issues related to housing, education, mental health. All of these things are coming to bear when we're talking about the kinds of changes that we want to see. But we will see some significant bills on police accountability, tracking the discipline issues, the transparency of information and data regarding the police, and those kinds of things we're gonna continue to see enhanced in the bills. The real key here, though, is frankly part of what this town hall is about, is to keep the momentum going on telling people what we want to see and why it's important. So that's what we're going to see going on. I'm encouraged by the fact that we have people who are continuing to talk about this, and not just at the street level, but importantly at the street level, but also at the legislative level, at the caucus, both the Democratic caucus and I think the Republican caucus as well. They're talking about the need to really do some things and not be distracted, as some people would like to see us distracted by anything happening in terms of any sort of violent situation. I think that has been pretty well, won't say dismissed, but it's one of those things where people have caught on to the plan, to the strategy of trying to make it the primary issue rather than the issue of dealing with police accountability. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's good to hear. That's exciting to hear. It sounds like a large slate of things to be brought up at the legislature, which I hope to be part of.
Well, there's another aspect to that too that you really need to recognize, and that's within the legislature at this particular point. Janelle Bynum is going to be the chair of the Judiciary Committee for the House. That's the plan. And the chair of the Public Safety Committee, the subcommittee on public safety for the Ways and Means Committee, is Senator Manning. So it helps to have those two in those positions, even when the full session begins. However it begins, and we don't really know how that's going to really work at this.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thanks much. It's very exciting. I mean, is it fair to say with your, your years in the legislature, do you feel like the tide is turning and that there is becoming a critical mass for things to happen at the state level, which will in turn help what we're able to do in Portland?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, the critical mass, I mean, it's really became very, very clear that the critical mass was reached after the Floyd murder. So people began to look at it. Even my colleagues who are on the other side of the aisle. I mean, if you look at the votes that we had and finally got through during the special sessions, you'll notice that they were not along party lines. In fact, you had very small numbers of people objecting to things because they recognized that in fact there was a need to get something done. So we've reached a critical mass. We've just got to sustain it. That's the issue, and that's going to mean people in the legislature like you, but also people in the community saying this is something we need to do. And frankly, it's also got to be what happens. In 9 days, the vote that takes place, everyone's looking at the national vote. I'm looking at the state vote, and see what that will mean, and that could be a real turning point as well.
Great, thank you. Thanks for all you do. I know you've been working on this for a long time. I'm glad. I'm just glad you're help leading the turning of this huge ship that is probably long overdue. And there were a couple other questions that have come up. One is, we in terms of Candace, this community oversight that you're, and on the committee that you're on, and then hopefully what evolves into something that's has more teeth in it with this ballot measure. Are there groups like this when it comes to the county sheriffs at all, or the state?
Well, I think that what we're seeing. Well, first of all, the issues that we're going to see at the county and at the state, we're going to try to basically provide a template for for various agencies, the various cities and counties, to be able to use the kind of discipline and tracking that's needed there. The other thing that you'll see is how the various not just agencies but the various community groups respond to things, and the changes that we'll see at the DPSST, I think, are going to be also incredibly important. We're asking that agency to take on a significantly larger role than it has in the past, not just do a quick training, but also really track who's out there, and also provide some resources to the Attorney General's office and other places so that we can do the investigation if we need to have investigations for things. So I think we're going to see we need to have a continued message to whatever legislator you have, whatever city council person that you have. See, this is the other thing that people don't recognize. It's not just a decision that happens at the state capitol level. Many of these kinds of messages have to come from the city, the county, and people within those cities and counties to their elected officials, because as elected officials, we end up talking with one another. And if we hear that in fact we need to have a much larger conversation, then things get done. So I would encourage people to continue to call those legislators, or when you see them in the grocery store, not every time, please. I'd like to get my groceries done, but when you see them around, ask them the question, or ask them if you're on a Zoom situation with them. Say, this is an issue that I want you to know I'm interested in and I'm concerned about, because otherwise they'll live in the bubble that there's no one talking about it, and we've got to get that. We've got to change that. We've got to pop that bubble, if you will.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because I mean, there are these different overlapping layers, right? You have your state representative, you have your state senator, you have your city council person, which of course is this citywide thing, even though we should have zones. We have our mayor, we have our county commissioners as well, you know, but I think that's a good point. It's a lot for, I think, the average voter to keep track of, and or knowing who we should say what to. But I think your point is well taken. We should say kind of everything to everyone, because I think there's so much, especially, and then we have Metro. I mean, there's so much overlap on this. So that's very good, good advice. I
got to tell you that the issue is that's a real problem, because in Multnomah County there are 250 elected officials in Multnomah County, and you're not going to be able to know who those are exactly. But if you do know of one person, if you do know of someone who is directly tied to you, then you should make sure that you contact them, because that will help a great deal. Great.
Thank you. And so I was going to turn it back to Candace. This is actually, you can make a little play for your committee. I know Doreen was saying, are you accepting new folks in your the oversight committee that you're on? I understand there are some openings on that committee. Is that correct, or have you guys filled those?
There are openings. The auditor doesn't want us to fill them until after we figure out what happens with Measure 26217. So I'm hoping as soon as it passes that we can open it up, because like we said, it's no matter what, between now and when that new board is implemented is 2 years, and we have to continue to do our work in the meantime.
Right. Thank you. And you know, the senator talked about, I'm scrolling up and down on my thing, the DPSST, which is the Public Safety and Standards Task Force. And as fortune would have it, Candace is actually on a steering committee to fix that task force. She really is, she walks the talk. And so thank you, Candace, for that. And then Candace, you also mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about a model you've seen in DC. And I think we all want to be aspirational to best practices.
Yeah, there's an organization called NACOL. It's like I always forget the acronym, but National something Civilian Oversight. National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. I think that's actually what it is. And they had a webinar that I went to this week on assemblies and protests, which I thought would be important for me to check out. And I learned some really cool things. 2 things that I took away. One thing I took away from Seattle's oversight board. They have this really cool dashboard that if you put in a complaint about the police, you can look and find your number, and it'll show you how far in the system it's done. It's like a little wheel. It's like 55% done, and we're doing this. I thought that was something pretty simple. Well, maybe not so simple, but like we should be like that. We should have that. You know, like we should definitely have that for complaints to the police. But then in DC, because DC, as you can imagine, they experience many, many protests. So they have developed lots of good best practices for how to oversee the police that are managing the protests. And they have something called assembly observers. And their system, like their CRC and IPR obviously is a lot different than ours. But essentially in their version of their CRC, they like staff the protests. It's interesting because it's almost like they do a lot of the work that you would see the police doing. They like make sure to check in with protest organizers, and it's a neutral body, and so that is helpful. They track like where is the protest going? Where's the map of where the protest going? Have people in zones. The office gives them like iPads and cameras and phones and things to document what's happening as a neutral party. And then they can witness what's going on with the police. And it has led to a lot of changes. They gave us like one tangible example of how they saw police. And the nice thing is that they train with the police. So they understand what the police are getting trained on when it comes to protest response. So then they know when something's off. They know if the policy is followed, and then they can document that. And that was kind of one thing that happened. That they were like, hey, we know that you have to do X, Y, Z, and you're not doing it. And it ended up with a policy change, and reeling them in. And they noticed the actual change on the streets by the police. So I would love to see that happen for us here in Portland. I'm hoping to push for that in the new system because, again, we're a city that loves to express our First Amendment. And I think that it would be good to have a party observing and to help with compiling the cases and the complaints. That's the nice thing, is that if a citizen puts in a complaint, and they also witness the information, they can combine that, and make the record stronger. And that helps the citizens be able to, see justice from their complaints. So it's something I'm hoping we can bring here.
Great. And I think this just comes back to, I think one of the fundamental things we need to think about, and I've talked to Representative Kasha Lawrence Spence about this, is like, what are services we can put into place where we are minimizing community interaction with the police? And that's why I have this, you can see this, CAHOOTS, right? Which I have to have this so I can remember the acronym, but Crisis Assistance Helping Out in the Streets. This is a program in Eugene where I think it's 15% of the calls that come into 911, instead of dispatching police for mental health crisis, housing crisis, addiction issue, they're dispatching a medic and a crisis intervention person, usually a social worker who's trained in de-escalation and trauma-informed care. And only in a very small number of those calls do they end up having to call the police. And it obviously saves money on policing, saves tons of money on ER visits. And it is the right thing to do. So this is something that I know Ron Wyden wants, he's talking about rolling it out on a national level, and I love his big thinking. But this is certainly something I think that we are looking at, certainly to expand beyond Eugene. And it's been an incredibly successful model there. And I think it goes to same thing, if we're gonna have protests, instead of having the police being the frontline people monitoring that, can't we have some neutral ground? Ostensibly the police are supposed to be neutral in that, but truly a neutral entity doing that. So thank you for that. And yes, Portland Street Response, exactly, which was, so that was announced about a year ago. And the latest I heard is it's not off the ground yet. Do you have an update on that, Candace? It's just
it was going to be piloted in the Lentz neighborhood in spring, but then COVID happened, and they had to put that money towards more important things, more urgent things. But with the cuts that were made by City Council to the Police Bureau, the 27 million they cut, a good chunk of that is going into Portland Street Response. So actually they're going to start it up again, because it was going to be like indefinite when they were going to be able to have money to do it again. So that was a really good thing that came out of those cuts and helping to fund that process. And now they have money for more. But yeah, I'm not sure the exact date, but they are definitely going to be implementing it soon.
And I think that's a great point. Oh my God, there's so many things we can talk about here. When people talk about defunding the police, can you tell us what that means, Candace? Are we just going to slash their budget and then there's going to be rampant crime in the streets?
No. I think that it's one of those terms that it means something different to everybody. And it definitely, for some people, means underfund it, or cut the budget. For some people, it means abolition. So it kind of depends. I fall in the place where I think that police have starved the city's budget of resources. And they continue the general fund, there are so many things that continue to go to police. And then again, we don't see the outcomes. So I want to see us reallocate that money into things like street response, into other first responder systems, and also into dealing with the many other linked issues that lead to interactions with the police, especially in Portland. A big thing is homelessness, houselessness, because again, over 50% are arrested, or over 50% of arrests are from the houseless community. So I think that defund the police really just means reinvest in the community, and stop. But it's kind of like administrative bloat part of it too, and also. And I would like to see some of that money invested into data and research so that we can have good best practices and we can implement, policies and see how they change. So I think that, it doesn't mean that police have no money. It doesn't mean that we don't have police. And I think one thing that people misunderstand about the Black community is that we are over-policed and under-protected. We want protection too. We want to be able to call the police when I need it and have them come and it not escalate a situation, but actually give me resolve, answer my problem. So I think that, we want to just make sure that when we interact with the police, that it's not creating more harm for us. And it's created, especially like the immigrant community with, with ICE and everything like it. The way that police respond to communities of color leads to them not calling the police. And that is what actually increases crime. People they don't trust the people that we're supposed to trust to be able to resolve those things. And then there's crime that goes unresolved. So it affects so many different things. And I want to see us put money back into systems like the street response and other ways that we're addressing housing and just livability.
Well, that sounds like a nice note to end on from you, Candace. Senator Frederick, do you have any closing thoughts or words or piece of advice? And then I have something I want to say about the election.
Well, just that I want to make sure that we understand that, as Candace said, that the defund the police means a lot of different things to different people. And we need to understand what that means. And the folks that I deal with on a regular basis, my neighbors, a number of the folks who I've worked with are absolutely concerned, as I am, about the ability to feel safe with the police. But we've got to understand that language can also backfire. A good number of those folks that I deal with say, when you say defund the police, that means you're leaving me without protection. And they don't want to see that. And we need to make sure that we're understanding that that's also part of the concern. So that should be part of any discussion that people have. The real key is that we need to reevaluate where we're spending money, what it's being spent on, who's involved and who is not, and whether it's actually working or not. This is a broader picture in terms of dealing with issues like addiction and other things, so that and homelessness. What are we actually doing that's being effective? Because we've tried to punish people for all sorts of things that they should not be punished for, but we think that that's the way it's going to make a change. We're starting to get some changes in that mindset, but it's going to take a bit. It's going to take a bit in terms of getting police that are in fact there to be protective, to protect and serve, not just to be a law enforcement people. So that kind of a change is an important one for us to look at and figure out how we're going to do it best. That's what the bills in the legislature are designed to address, and I hope we'll get some things done. Thank you for putting this together, by the way.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And I think, I think that's a great point. And the article Candace referred to, the Oregonian piece today, 50% of police arrests are of the homeless, and the homeless represent 3% of our population. And this kind of churning of arrest and jailing and then back out and then arrest, that does not solve the crimes. It does not solve the problems. What solves it is putting these people in housing. Once these people are in housing, they're not being arrested. They're not committing the crimes. And then, of course, continuing to decriminalize personal quantities of drug, which is another ballot measure, I think is really important, and treating addiction as an illness and not a crime. So I'm excited. I mean, I think that there are a lot of opportunities, certainly on our ballot and in the upcoming legislature, in a city council, looking at ways to do this police oversight board with hopefully Candace intimately involved in that. I think this might be some really important changes. So I appreciate you all being here this evening. I will do a little shout out about the election. I agree with Senator Frederick that the local elections are very important. Be sure to vote. If you want to get involved in any elections for state legislators that are in tighter seats, tighter races than mine, I'm fortunate that things are looking pretty good for me on November 3rd. I won't talk about my campaign. But it's very important that we change who's in the White House, and it's very important that we flip the U.S. Senate, and it's very important that we preserve the Democratic majority in the U.S. House. The best way to do that is to phone bank. It's too late for postcards. You can maybe do some texting, but let's spend these next 10 days phone banking. And the easiest turnkey way to do that is with Indivisible Oregon, hands down. I've done it with a lot of different groups. IndivisibleOregon.com, right? IndivisibleOR.com. Isn't that right, Kristen?
Lisa, it's
Yes.
indivisibleor.org.
Okay, I will type it in. And if you go to their splash page, indivisibleor.org, there are phone banks several times a day between now and including, I'm sure, Election Day. So thank you all for being here. Wow, what a great discussion. Thank you, Candace Avalos. Thank you, Senator Lou Frederick. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.